So as you just heard, this meeting is being recorded. I'm Jesse Firestone, the Curatorial Assistant, and I'll do a little bit more of a verbal description in a moment. But before I do, I want to pass this off to Eileen Jane Lynch, who's the Curator of Visual Arts, who's going to do some introductory sort of materials.
Thank you, Jesse. Thank you, Zachary, and thank you everyone for being here. As Jesse mentioned, I'm Eileen Jane Lynch, and I'm delighted to introduce this program, Beyond Sight, The Shadow of the Sun. It brings together exhibiting artist Zachary Logan and curatorial assistant Jesse Bandler Firestone for an in-depth conversation about Zachary's work in the exhibition on view at Wave Hill. Before we begin, I would like to do an accessibility check. Today, we have a few options for participation. You can ask a question using the chat function. For those dialing in, if you'd like to ask a question, you can text the following number, 732-470-4428. And I just want to make sure that everyone can see the chat here. If you can't, please let me know. We are not providing ASL interpretation for this program, but we are using closed captioning through Zoom. To start closed captioning, please press the CC button at the bottom of the toolbar in the Zoom window. You might also have to click on the three dots that say more to enable that option. I also wanted to provide some keyboard shortcuts, and I'm going to include that in the chat. Does anyone have any questions or is not able to access any of the services that we just listed? So now I'm going to continue with the land acknowledgement. We acknowledge the traditional, ancestral, unceded homelands of the Lenape, the Munsee, the Manhattan, the Canarsie, the Matinecock, the Shinnecock, and other indigenous nations. We respect that many indigenous people continue to live and work on this land and recognize their ongoing contributions to the region. We also acknowledge the enslaved Africans whose labor built and developed the Northeast during the colonial era and beyond. Zachary is coming to us from Regina, Saskatchewan, situated on the territories of the Nihinyawa, Anishinaabeg, Dakota, Lakota, Nakota, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. So thank you again, everyone, for joining us for this conversation between Zachary and Jesse. This program is presented in conjunction with the current exhibition, The Shadow of the Sun, Ross Bleckner and Zachary Logan. And I'm sorry, I forgot to provide a verbal description. So I wanted to let everyone know that I am an Asian American woman with dark brown shoulder length hair with brown eyes. I'm wearing a magenta colored shirt. I'm wearing a black mask and have white headphones on. Behind me is an angled view of a site-specific wall drawing by Zachary Logan. The wall is painted light blue and it has graphite drawings of various flora on it. And beyond that is a doorway showing another work by Zachary. It's called Wave Hill Window Number 1, and it has a black window frame with some foliage that you can see beyond. So now we're going to show a video of a man talking in front of a fantastical landscape. We are so grateful to the Consulate General of Canada in New York for their support of the exhibition. I'm going to be playing this brief message from Acting Consul General Howar Nassam.
Hello everyone, bonjour tout le monde. I'm Howar Nassam, Canada's Acting Consul General here in New York, and I'm honored to join our friends at Wave Hill to support this wonderful exhibit, The Shadow of the Sun, by Ross Bleckner and Zachary Logan. This exhibit resonated for us as it chronicles the relationship between two artists who have created collaborative works while living in different countries, Canada and the US. I often say that artists are our greatest ambassadors, as they tell a much more vivid story than I ever could. I don't have to tell you how much cultural institutions have suffered this year, and while we've continued to support them virtually, we're keen to experience them live. So we couldn't be more thrilled that this exhibit can be viewed in person at the magnificent Wave Hill. I wish everyone the best as we emerge from this challenging year. Keep safe. Thank you. Merci.
And now I'm going to introduce our panelists. So we have Jesse Bandler Firestone, Curatorial Assistant at Wave Hill, and Zachary Logan, exhibiting artist in the current show. Zachary has developed a studio practice focused on drawing, painting, ceramics, and installation. Zachary's work has been exhibited in group and solo exhibitions in the Americas, Europe, and India. His work can be found in public and private collections worldwide, including the National Gallery of Canada, Remy Modern, Art Gallery of Ontario, and Leslie Lohman Museum in New York, among others. Zachary participated in Wave Hill's Winter Workspace program in 2016. And without further ado, Jesse and Zachary, I'll let you take it away.
Thanks, Eileen, for that introduction.
Thank
So
you.
before we begin, I want to do a verbal description of myself. As I said, I'm Jesse Firestone, Curatorial Assistant. I'm a white male with some curly, shortish hair that has some highlights in it, kind of moving in all directions, it looks like. And I've got an earring dangling from my left ear that's kind of swaying side to side, almost like a pendulum. And I'm wearing a black mask and a white t-shirt that has a mesh quality to it. So if you look closely, you can probably see my skin underneath. Zachary, can you describe yourself?
Sure. I as well am a white male. I have a mustache and my hair, I have long hair that's pulled back in a very Victorian man bun. And I'm wearing a floral shirt with some red roses on it. And behind me is a swirly floral drawing.
Thanks. Eileen, I think this would be a great time to start sharing the PowerPoint. So to give a bit of an overview of how this program will work, if this is your first time attending one of these, we have about 10 slides for this program. Each time a slide comes up, I'll do a brief description of what the slide actually looks like, and then we have written descriptions for the images and the artworks that we're going to talk about and go into more detail about process, interpretation, colors, and a whole other host of aspects that relate to the work. So the first slide here says beyond sight, the shadow of the sun in white text, and below it, it says art through verbal descriptions, interpretation, and communication. And to the right-hand side of the slide is a photograph of Zachary's hand over a painting, or a drawing rather, a chalk pastel drawing that has white, pink, and sort of reddish colors to it, mostly floral flowers that are in that color. And Zachary's hand is stained the same color as the flowers. So the pastel has stained Zachary's hand. And then if we could go to the next slide. So this slide here has three images in it. They're equal sized. It's three rectangles that take up an equal amount of space. So 1/3, 1/3, and 1/3 of the slide. The image on the left is a photograph of a wall that has an in-process drawing on it. The drawing is mostly black with some green leaves. And then to the side of the drawing, directly on the wall, are a number of squiggles and sort of gestural marks that Zachary has made directly onto the wall next to the drawing. The middle image in this slide is of Zachary's left hand turned upwards so that the palm is facing the camera, and the entire palm of Zachary's hand has been stained this deep hunter green color, almost the color of like a conifer tree. And you also see a silver ring on his ring finger. And then the last image in this slide, which is to the right, is an aerial photograph of the studio floor of Zachary where a bunch of pastel and pencil shavings are. So it looks kind of like a pile of wood with some charcoal in there, and that's a bit of his process. So Zachary, I want to start with the picture on the left.
Sure.
I'm particularly intrigued by those squiggly lines on the wall. Can you talk a bit about that and how that comes about as part of your process?
Sure. So when I work with Pastel, this is primarily when this occurs. Sometimes it'll happen with graphite as well, but I work with a lot of pigment, so a lot of dry pigment. And I really should also be wearing a mask at all times, and I get into a lot of trouble with my husband for that. But sometimes I'll come home covered in pastel on my face, and you can tell I'm not wearing a mask. But my hands get the brunt of the material, and that's obviously because they are, physically interacting. I am rather with my hands physically interacting with the pastels. So, with a drawing like the one that's on this first slide, the process gets quite messy because I will cover the entire surface of, in this case, what is a black sheet of paper with a layer of black pastel. So I cover the whole surface. And if it's a very large drawing, for example, like let's say it's a drawing that's 5 by 10 feet, that's a lot of pastel to cover the surface. So I grind it onto the surface, and then I smooth it out. So I take my hands and I rub my hands across the pastel until it's a nice sort of black velvety surface. And then I draw over top with pigment, so with colors. So the green that you see there is sort of the next part is what I start to add in color. And and sometimes I'll do some erasing and then redrawing if I find that the black is dulling the pigment, the color too much, and I want something to pop out. I'll completely erase an area, and then I'll redraw. Or there's another process where I will sometimes I will draw something with color right on top of the surface as the first part, and then I'll add black around, and then I'll add pigment to the background if I want something to really pop out in the foreground. But what happens is I have so much pastel on my hands, I can't use my hand as a blending stick. And at a certain point, I have to rub it off. And my pants or shorts or legs only take so much pigment, so it starts to just go on the wall. And now that's what I do. The excess area of wall space just becomes littered with these sort of squiggles, and it becomes another drawing, really. And I love the wall, and I love seeing the wall transform, from when I begun in a studio, and as I carry on. So I've been in this studio now for, I think, about a year and a half, close to 2 years. So it's transforming with every drawing that I put up and then take down. The wall changes, and so it's just another sort of delightful part of the studio process. But I'll get to a point with my fingers where I actually have to take a rest day, because in particular my pinky, I will be rubbing so hard, and what'll happen is that my pinky will lose all the skin off of the finger, and it'll start to bleed. So at that point I have to take a day or two and sort of nurse it, and then I have a really great callus for drawing with once it heals over. So then it's really great, and that usually happens close to 1 week into a fairly large composition.
So it's really also a physically demanding process to make your drawings. And I even remember when you were on site here and drawing a site-specific installation, there were moments of sort of these acrobatic moves that you were making, where you're twisting and contorting. And it's so great to be able to kind of see that process on the record on the wall there. I think it would also be interesting to hear a little bit, because you just started to talk about it, sort of the quantity of material that some of your work requires. Can you share with the audience a work that comes to mind that really took like an absurd amount of material to make, that really stands out to you for that aspect?
Yeah, I mean, it probably would be one of the drawings in my or any one of the drawings in my Unique Tapestry series, which is a series of sort of nocturnal images of of a sort of garden or ditch space that is in reference to the unicorn tapestry. So it's just filled up with hundreds, if not thousands, of different flora and fauna. And sometimes in these compositions, there's also a figurative element, but not in all of them. But they span a very large amount of space. So I think the largest one to date is about 25 feet, but it's a lot of layering of pigment and erasing and redrawing. But it's less erasing, more just drawing over top, because I mean, there is a point where the pastel pigment just says, no more. And if you want to continue to layer over top, you have to do a bit of erasure. But I rarely get to that point. But I also really grind the pigment in. Pastel, it has a reputation for being very fugitive and very easily disrupted, but it actually, it holds itself quite well. And I never fix my drawings. So for example, they travel quite well all over the place, but still have a lot of pigment on the surface. But I couldn't really even give you an estimate of how many single sticks of pastel go into a drawing, but those took a lot. And for example, the drawing behind me that I had described as sort of swirly floral, it's the largest drawing I've done to date. So you're seeing most of 2 panels of it behind me, but it's 45 feet. But it actually has a lot less pigment on it because I chose to use both graphite, colored pencil, watercolor pencil, and wax as well. So it's got a lot of different materials that I'm not usually using, but they're and graphite, but they're a lot. I use them a lot more sparingly than I do the pastel.
Thank you for explaining that. And I think just to give another layer of context for that, the drawing behind you, Zachary, also doesn't have a black background. So
no,
I think,
it does not.
Yeah. And so I think a lot of what I'm hearing is that to get that sort of velvety black quality also takes a tremendous amount of pinky work, as you said.
Yes.
And then also material. So Eileen, can you go to the next slide? Because I want to get into some of the artworks that we have on display. Thanks. So the photograph that's on view right now is of the middle gallery in Glyndor, and it was taken at an angle so that the camera is facing northwest towards a corner where the west wall and the north walls meet. The north wall is in the background of this image, and the west wall is on the left side of the photograph. The gallery is situated within a Georgian revival-styled house with glossy wood floors in shades of brown, dirt brown, and tan leather, with crisp white walls with molding where the ceilings and the walls meet, as well as moldings that run across every wall at about waist height. There are 2 doors visible in this photograph. In the northernmost part of the western wall are French doors with windows that open up to a terrace, and in the center of the northern wall is a threshold without a door that leads directly into another gallery. The space is incredibly well lit and luminous from both natural light from the windows, track lights from the ceiling, as well as light that reflects off the glossy wood floors. In the center of the photograph, slightly towards the foreground, is a square white pedestal close to the ground with a bone-colored sculpture called Fountain. Moving from left to right, on the wall just west of the sculpture is a framed artwork with soft blues, floral forms, and a face-like shape outlined in black. On the northern wall, to the west of the threshold, leading into the north gallery, is Apparitions, Black Mold, Bruising. It's two drawings on baby blue paper that are stacked on top of each other, hanging just below the ceiling and cascading down off the wall onto the gallery floor. On the other side of the threshold is a frame painting that is both abstract and a representation of a vantage point, peering into a white and yellow colored landscape through dark colored leaves that frame the background. So that was just a description of the sort of layout of the space. And now I want to go in detail to talk about two of the works that were in that image. So Eileen, if you could go to the next slide. Thanks. And so there are a couple descriptions that I'm going to read, and I'm going to pause after each one to give a moment for our audience to ask for clarification. Some of these are a little lengthy, and that's because the detail in these drawings is so important, and I really want to bring that out to everybody here. So for apparition, black mold, and bruising, Logan has combined two different pastel drawings, both on the same colored light blue paper, to create a single piece that towers over the human body. The work is significantly taller than the human body, making it feel like an architectural element as it hangs just below the ceiling and cascades onto the floor. The two works are visually distinct and almost contract one another, with the top work, called Apparition, featuring a black amorphous plume-like shape. The bottom drawing contains over 20 highly detailed botanicals that range in color from deep eggplant purple, yellow the color of urine, ruby reds, and softer, more faint tones of greens, blues, and pinks. The works are not physically fused together, but are installed on top of one another so that they overlap just slightly. They are pinned at corners to create a subtle bowing of the paper, where the bottom edge of the top drawing protrudes outward from the wall so that the drawings never actually touch. Does anybody have any questions, or can I clarify sort of how those two drawings are installed in relation to each other? So I'm going to talk about black mold right now. So the two most prominent features of apparition black mold are the soft baby blue color paper and the largely amorphous black shape that is rendered in a way that it appears to be engulfing the paper or have stained the paper like fallen ash from plumes of smoke, fire, or like spores of mold. The density of the black fades out from the center of the form, from thick to thin, as if it is spreading. Logan has also rendered a botanical drawing within the black smoke's negative space. It's almost as if a plant had been left on the paper and pulled up after the paper had been stained, leaving the negative image of the plant itself. Its stems, leaves, and tiny flowers appear like an evaporated form, trace, or fossil that was left behind. Is there anything I can add to that description? So the bottom.
These are all pastels, correct?
These are all pastels, Sharon, yes.
Thank you, Jesse.
The bottom pastel drawing, Bruising, is set against the same soft colored blue paper as Apparition black mold. For Bruising, Logan has drawn a cascade of falling botanicals of different shapes with various colored stems, leaves, and flowers. Like a feather softly falling from a great height, the plant forms drift from the top of the canvas down. Many of the botanicals touch and overlap, creating tender moments of contact. Stem to stem, stema to stema, or flower to flower. Did somebody have a question that they were going to ask? I thought I just heard somebody. The composition is loosely triangular, and in that way, also bodily. In the top third of the canvas, towards the top left corner of the drawing, there are 3 dark black colored plants that are gathered close together with moments of overlapping contact so that there is plenty of negative space to see the paper below. In the lower half of this top third, 3 more botanical forms start and are colored dark eggplant purple, but begin to slowly and subtly shift into yellows, watered down crimson reds, and lavender-like purples. As the forms continue to fall, their presence begins to thin, appearing lighter and softer in a steady gradient towards the bottom edge of the canvas. At the bottom of the composition, where the paper begins to spill onto the gallery floor, some of the flowers are drawn so lightly that they appear like impressions or traces of an image. Is there anything I can add to the description of bruising before we go into some questions?
Sharon, you said it spills onto the gallery floor. Does it literally go all the way onto the floor of the painting?
It does. So it's installed probably a foot below the ceiling, and then the 2 forms or 2 drawings come together and literally spill and touch the gallery floor, coming out maybe 2 or 3 inches off the floor onto the ground itself.
And is it on paper or is it literally done on the gallery wall? They're on paper, right?
These are on paper. So it's 2 paper drawings that are installed on top of each other to create a larger sort of column-like work.
That's so interesting. Thank you.
You're welcome. Can I give clarification for anything else in terms of the verbal description of that work?
I'm sorry, one more question. They're not framed then?
No, that's a great question. They are not framed. They are tacked directly to the wall at the corners using pins.
Okay, thank you.
So, Zachary, the blue color of this paper appears in other places of the show. What does the blue signify to you in this work, and does its significance change depending on how it's used?
Yeah. I mean, I found this paper as a distributor that knew that I was interested in different colored papers and had in the past sold me black paper and brown paper, and found this blue paper. And initially, I think at least with this work, it sort of signifies a sky or sort of a negative space that is just slightly elevated or different from being exacted on white paper. There's just something slightly maybe even also I link ideas about like melancholy and magic to the color blue, and I use blue a lot in with my Mylar drawings, and so it's a fairly new material for me, but those are some of the associations that I have with it thus far. Yeah, it's just such a new. I think actually this blue, this bruising, I think it's the second drawing that I've done on this blue paper until I did the drawing that's here behind me. It's on the same blue paper. But yeah, I mean, the significance really also is in the exhibiting of it. So having it mostly exhibited on white walls, it just sort of also I don't know, it just sort of puts it in a slightly different realm, I feel, than if it were to have been done on white paper. The white of the background would have been fine. It would have been something else, but really, yeah, it's a very new material for me, so I'm still sort of, figuring all of that out. But I knew I wanted to do this particular composition on the blue paper. As soon as I essentially found the paper from my distributor, I had this drawing in mind, and I knew I wanted it to be on the blue paper. But other than that, I can't speak too much to the significance other than associations to the color blue with melancholy and yeah.
Sure, and there's a long history of that melancholy and blue,
Right.
with history and in music, and it'll be interesting to see as you sort of continue to use this paper and this material how that deepens for you, or what else can kind of come up for you with that.
Unfortunately, I have to add to that, it is no longer being made.
Oh no.
Yeah, so I got all these rolls of this blue, which was great, and I started working on this massive composition, again, the one that you see behind me, and I found out about a month into doing the drawing, and I had already, rolled out that there was no more paper. So I got 2 more rolls, the last 2 rolls that the distributor could get for me. I'm sure I'll be able to find some somewhere online, and I'm currently searching it out. But apparently, yeah, the company that made this blue paper is no longer making it. So it'll be pretty. I'm going to be very with the last 2 rolls that I have, which are large rolls. They're 10 yards by 50 inches. So there's quite a bit to work with. But I don't know. I was second guessing doing this massive composition on this paper because I suddenly became so,
like precious about the material.
Yeah, precious about the material. So, yeah. Anyway, this is the thing too about materials. You find something that you really love, and you don't physically make it. You're sort of, yeah. You're limited to your distributor, to your, to the people who actually produce the materials. So it's something to consider that one doesn't always do.
I mean, that's a really interesting sort of conversation for maybe another topic of like when artist materials are no longer available, kind of what happens to the creative process. Interesting. I want to also talk a bit about the 2 works in relation to each other.
Absolutely.
And so they feel very different. One is monochromatic and smoke-like and kind of features this amorphous black shape. And then the other are these really detailed botanical drawings. How do you see them in relation to each other, and what kind of spurred you to put them in contact?
Okay. Well, first, I guess I'll talk about the intention of both of them sort of separately, because here I see them as one. I do see them as sort of one. Well, I suppose 2 separate pieces in dialogue, but it's sort of one entity for me in this iteration. But they were done at different times, and even though they're related, they do have sort of a sort of separate inspiration, I suppose, that's related. So for bruising, the title of bruising obviously relates to the instance. So it was at the early part of the pandemic when here in Saskatchewan we were sort of shut down the hardest, that our lockdown was the most that it ever was. I don't think we were ever locked down as much, for instance, as New York or in Italy or Spain. But we did have, periods of isolation, and I had bruised my leg. I got a really bad bruise in the studio. And I think I was thinking about isolation and the passing of time. And I just started to record the bruise as it shifted from black. It was like a pretty bad bruise on my thigh. As it shifted from blacks into purples, into sort of a rust color, into yellows and blues and sort of lavendery colors, back into sort of my skin tone. And then I started to sort of represent that passage of time through digital photographs of the bruise. But the dried flowers are primarily from memory. I do have some I collect flowers in the fall, usually when I'm walking to and from my studio, and I just have them sort of piled up in my studio because I just like to look at them. And so in some cases they're in reference to those dried flowers, in other they're sort of more creations. So oftentimes in my work, I work primarily from memory. And so I will sort of conjoin different species together, or just sort of create my own form from muscle memory of things I've drawn in the past, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But essentially, this depiction, which is sort of body-sized, is a depiction of a passage of time through a changing of one's body. So, you know, at the time, like I said, it was the beginning of the pandemic, really, and I had been quite ill coming back from an exhibition in Atlanta, and I never ended up getting a test. In Saskatchewan, everything was sort of triaged. So unless you couldn't breathe, you weren't going to be, you couldn't go into emergency, or unless you it was really a medical emergency. So I was just told to stay at home. And so I recovered from that, and then, you know, moved back into the studio. I was drawing a little bit at home, but I did, you know, I was very fortunate to still have access to my studio at that time. And it was pretty much only me in the building. So I was able to work. And it was a very sort of profound time to be making work, because I couldn't help but be obviously affected by what was going on around me. And so this drawing sort of came out of that time and that reflection on time. So that's really what, and so that, of course, that relates to the title. And the second piece that I did actually this spring, called Black Mold, it does also relate to an instance of the experience of black mold. But I was thinking about the two different processes, so the drying of flowers, or flowers dying, and then having sort of, in my opinion, metaphorically a second life as these sort of beautiful objects, because I find dried flowers to be as beautiful, if not more, in terms of the subtlety of the color of them, as well as their texture, and the sound of them, as beautiful, if not more beautiful, to fresh cut flowers. And both are dead. Like, once you cut a flower, it's still sort of taking nourishment of water and perhaps sugar water, but it is essentially dead. So it's you know, a continuation of that process. And the black mold, which is, you know, a very different thing. It is sort of alive, but it is sort of definitely dangerous to for humans to sort of breathe it in or have it in their homes. And actually, the instance where this idea for the black mold came in was when it was from traveling in Italy. I had an exhibition in early 2019 in Verona, and my husband came with me for that trip. And we actually had a couple of days after installation to travel around. So we were staying in an apartment in Verona that was provided by the gallery, and it's very sort of wet and cool in the wintertime in the Veneto in Verona. And we shut the windows, and we were not supposed to do that. We didn't know. So we went to to Florence for 2 nights, and we came back, and we found black mold growing on the back of our, like behind our bed. And it was pretty intense. And it was like, it had grown so quickly for the time that we were gone. So we were sort of very shocked by that. But also we were told not to close the windows, and we were like, should we not close the windows? So anyway, we talked to the landlord, and of course, no, we shouldn't have. And that's sort of what caused this immediate growth. But it was so beautiful to me. And Ned's like, hey, we got to clean this. And he came back into the room, and I was drawing on black mold with my finger, and he was like, are you crazy? Stop that. But that's sort of where the idea to do this the composition itself, but of course, metaphorically has a slightly different meaning to me. I actually was, in bringing the two together, I was thinking about images of like a God hand, you know, in Catholic imagery, where the hand of God sort of just pokes itself into the image. And that's kind of what how I sort of view this. And that's also why I called it apparition. You know, it's the experience of having this beautiful plume, or whatever you call this sort of form of black mold, growing basically over a day or two, this, again, passage of time, creating this beautiful but dangerous thing. So that's sort of, you know, and I also wanted to create this sort of a tenuousness between the two images. So having them just sort of touch or kiss, but not be, initially I thought about sewing them together, and I'm really glad I did not do that, because I would like them to exist as two separate drawings. But I also like the idea of this beautiful, you know, pristine colonial building having this depiction of black mold literally on the wall. And it sort of, I think, speaks to maybe a couple of different layers of narrative, perhaps.
It does, and I have to say that I'm tickled when I see the black mold on our walls also. But rest assured, everybody, if you come here, there is no actual black mold.
No black mold. But
like,
you know, it also kind of, as I was doing it too, I was thinking about the fact that I am breathing in this pastel. Like, even if I am wearing a mask too, it's just, you know, but I, you know, it will never stop me from working with the material.
well, just wear a mask. We want everyone to be safe.
Yeah.
Thank you for that really detailed explanation. I want to move on to another piece.
Yeah.
Eileen, can you go to the next slide? And go to the next one. There we go. So on this PowerPoint slide, there's 3 images. On the left is an image of that bone-colored sculpture that I described briefly when I was going through the gallery. Then the middle image is a detail of that bone-colored sculpture, which features a handful of intricately sculpted clay flowers and buds and stems. And then on the right-hand side of this slide is an in-process photograph of Zachary, of you actually sculpting and sort of making this piece. Before we go into questions from the audience and also from myself, I want to read a description of this artwork. So I'm going to begin that right now. This work is called Fountain, and it is a bone-colored pale tan clay sculpture that is approximately waist height, and it is comprised of many smaller clay pieces of intricately sculpted flowers, leaves, and stems of all different shapes, sizes, and types. The work is a bouquet of stone flowers, and it sits on a square white pedestal a few inches off the ground. The general shape of the sculpture is concave in 3 dimensions. Imagine taking the outline of an oval, cutting it in half, and positioning each half so that the rounded edges are facing each other. This is the general shape of the sculpture. I want to go into some more detail, but before I do, does anybody have questions about sort of the general shape of the work that I just described?
It's Sharon. Could I go back to the blue for a minute?
Oh, sure.
Just 2 quick questions. Is it handmade paper? And maybe you said this and I missed it. What shade of blue is it?
Well, it's like a, I don't know, like a soft baby blue. Like it's actually a bit warmer in person. It photographs a little bit cooler than it actually is. And it shifts when it's in one room with a particular light and in another room. So, but it is like a pale sort of baby bluish color, very beautiful color. And it's not I mean, yeah, it comes from, I think it's a type of Stonehenge paper.
So, excuse me, so the paper doesn't have a texture, like,
No, it's very, very smooth.
Okay. And would it be close to, is it like sort of similar to a Tiffany blue? Is it that kind of a blue?
I'm not familiar with Tiffany blue. Okay. I'm sorry.
But it's a baby blue. Okay.
Yeah. It's really, you're welcome. Sorry.
Sharon, I'm looking at Tiffany blue right now on my computer. That Tiffany blue has a touch more green to it.
Okay.
This is almost like a clear light blue sky with a bit of overcast, and I think that could be the warmth that maybe Zachary is talking
Yeah,
about.
I think so. That's a
Yeah.
good way of describing it, Jesse. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. Thank you both.
So I'm going to move back to Fountain, unless anybody has any other questions about the two works we were discussing earlier. Okay, so the top of the sculpture is bulbous and almost crown-like a lavishly decorated cake, but instead of icing, it's adorned with ceramic flowers, leaves, and stems radiating out in many directions. Moving from the top towards the bottom, the sculpture becomes slightly thinner, tapering inward towards its middle. The center areas of the sculpture are not as densely encrusted with botanical sculptures as the top, but the middle features vine-like stems and leaves wrapped around it. As the sculpture approaches the pedestal, its form begins to expand again, this time to a width almost double that of the top. Towards the base, flowers, stems, and leaves appear to spill onto the pedestal, filling it and approaching its edges. I use the word spill because even though the work is static, there is a water-like quality to its arrangement where each individual piece has been placed next to slightly larger or smaller pieces in a way that makes the work feel both dense, frothy, and undulating like bubbling water. It's almost kaleidoscopic too, in that each component creates a vibratory effect with its neighbors, where the forms collide, lines connect, then break, and connect again, and the negative spaces between each piece creates another layer of shape and form. Can I add anything to that verbal description to sort of qualify how it's put together, or how many pieces there are?
You're asking me, Jesse. I've lost count. You did a really great head count of flowers. I think at one point they were all on the table, and you had a number. I think it was like 121 or something like that.
Sure. Yes.
We'll say. Yeah. So one of the features of this piece is that every time I show it, I have several more at least than the last iteration. So it's, again, a reference to being time-based, I guess. It changes with every installation. I suppose I could, say that the pieces, everything is sort of separate. So the top part that you described is sort of crown-like. It comes off, and then the central neck of the sculpture is a separate piece, and then the bottom that's currently adorned with flowers, and you can sort of see the edge of it in the third photograph where I'm actually working on it as greenware. It's sort of donut shaped, so they're all separate, and each of the 120 odd flowers is also separate, and they all go sort of in their own place in crates.
And so in that way, this is a sculpture of many smaller pieces, right?
Absolutely. many, yes.
Smaller components. Does anyone from the audience have any questions or want clarification on anything, or have questions for Zachary?
It's Sharon. I'm sorry that we keep asking. This is
No.
Great. Please do.
Thank you. So I may have missed this, so forgive me. Is it colored? It
is colored. It's colored just the sort of vitrified color that it is. So it's the color of it is in reference for me. The first time I ever used clay, it was this clay. It's called M370. And it has a slightly bone color to it. And I really like that association to the body. So I've left it. I haven't done any glazing or painting or anything like that. It's just that color out of the kiln.
Okay, so all the flowers all have the same color.
Exactly. Yeah.
And when you, which must be a massive job to put it together each time. Do each, like, is there a slot, if you will, for each individual flower, or do you sort of go change it as you do it each time?
Every time it's completely different. So it's sort of like a new bouquet every time.
Wow.
And I have I have some medium-sized flowers or ones that have really elongated stems, and I know, I'll use them in a particular way, but nothing ever ends up in the exact same place.
That's fascinating. Thank you. And so you fired it, but you didn't glaze it. Is that what you just said?
Exactly. Yeah. And so part of it is the color, but also there's a slight texture to the clay that holds things in place really well. So there's no museum wax or anything. It's just held in place, sort of through the texture of the material and the way that I've placed it.
Oh, so literally, there's nothing. Oh, right. That's what
Yeah.
nothing holding it together. Fascinating. That's great.
And so, Zachary, I want to sort of go a little deeper into Sharon's question about the color, because
Sure.
so much of your work does involve like an intensity of color, whether it's very vibrant sort of purples and blues or even sort of softer shades. And so what was that experience like, making a work that is so monochromatic? And also why that color? I know it's about sort of the raw material of the clay, but is there another association to that rawness that you're teasing out?
Yeah, I mean, it really is the association. So like I probably should have said at the beginning of the talk, but all of my work, the catalyst for all of my work is always my body. I'm always thinking about my body and my body in space, and how my body affects space, and also how my body and our bodies are simply parts of the landscape. There's no sort of separation or escape from nature. And so with this piece, it really was about my own physical body. So these are, I suppose this is a piling of bones, of my own bones, but it also is related to the colonial past and present of the current, of the province in which I was born and raised as a settler person of Scottish descent. So it also is very much in reference to the photographs of the pilings of buffalo bones from the turn of the last century. And I live in the city of Regina, which is called Pile of Bones, also called Pile of Bones, known as, because of, in part because of this, this sort of massacre of buffalo, which was in a way to take away the major food source of the indigenous peoples who lived in this region. So it really, it has several different associations, but very much tied to bone matter, both mine and this sort of remembrance of. And so, yeah, the use of color, again, in many cases relates back to my thinking about the body and for instance, and we'll come to it, but the Mary Delaney piece, it's right in the title there. So it's those are sort of the associations with color that I'm making continually.
Great. I think you mentioned Mary Delaney.
Yes.
Nice, good moment to sort of segue into the next section. Unless, does anybody have any other questions about the sculptural work?
And I'm sorry,
I have
Sharon,
a question.
go ahead.
This is Susan Holstrick. I have a question. How do you, with 121 pieces, how are you sticking them together? Is there some medium, or
No.
how do they attach and hold together?
It's simply the sort of physics of the way that they're placed together and the slight texture of the clay itself. So it's not porcelain. It's a very fine clay, but it does have enough of a tooth to just hold things in place. And
are you saying it's like a puzzle?
Yes, a puzzle that's
isn't
different every time.
It's not permanently together.
No.
And so, and it isn't any kind of glue that,
No. The pieces, they're actually, that's not entirely true. There is the section at the top that sort of looks crown-like. Those pieces are glued into place. So that's the only instance, just the top. There are several pieces that are glued around that stay there. But everything else around the base, it always changes, and none of it is glued or placed with any sort of material. It's simply just the physics of the clay, the body, the particular clay body, its texture, and the placement.
yeah, it's hard for me to imagine two rough surfaces staying together.
Yeah,
You know, it would be different if you were saying that there was like a tongue and groove effect.
So,
But you're not saying that one doesn't fit into the other.
no, actually, and Jesse, you were there while I was installing.
yeah.
You know, how would you describe, like, would you describe how I was sort of putting them together any sort of differently to sort of elucidate?
Yeah, I mean, I think on the one hand, there's a part of assembling this work that really is a lot like a floral bouquet, where if you be placing, let's say, botanicals with long stems and flowers up top, sort of next to each other in a vessel, there's a level of gravity that also keeps them in place. And also the tension and sort of the physics of having different floral forms literally support ones that are next to each other. And then the ones that are sort of on the ground, some of them get stacked on top of each other and sort of are moved around. And I think Zachary would even say, and correct me if I'm wrong, but there are moments where like you place something and it doesn't feel stable, right? And so,
absolutely.
So you move it till it finds its sort of balance or center point.
Absolutely. Yeah.
You should almost make a video of putting together your sculpture.
I think that's a good idea.
Thank you.
Thank you, Susan.
Sharon, did you also have a question?
I just two things I was going to ask. I forgot what the title of it was, and also I guess you addressed it. So you were indeed able to come here and put it together, even though it was pandemic.
I was, yeah. So it was in the middle of May that I started the installation, and I had my first vaccination, so I was able to travel. And, you know, everything was fine. I stayed up in Harlem and came and installed. And I also did a site-specific wall drawing while I was in town too. So it was great. Yeah, it was glorious to be back in New York and, you know, doing such a wonderful thing and at such a great time of the year.
That's terrific. And what is this called again? I'm sorry.
The title of this piece is called Fountain.
Fountain.
Yeah, and it actually, when I might as well, since I'm talking a little bit title, I initially did this so that it would actually function and water would spout out of the top, and then I realized that I wanted it to be a non-functioning fountain, so it's sort of bird bath sized as well.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Any other questions for Zachary about this sculpture? Okay, I think Eileen, if you can go 2 slides ahead. So I want to talk about this artwork, which is called Blood Cells after Lady Mary Delaney. I'm going to read the description of this artwork right now, and then at any time, if you want to ask questions or need clarification, just jump right in. Everyone's doing a great job of that. and then we can ask Zachary some questions after. So Blood Cells after Lady Mary Delaney is a large rectangular canvas whose width is far greater than the average human wingspan with arms outstretched. Set against a dark black, void-like background, this chalk pastel drawing features around 50 different botanical drawings, boasting leaves of different shapes and sizes, and flowers of all kind, some of which are small and some are large. The botanicals have stems of varying thicknesses and lengths, and all of these forms overlap and intersect at different points across the canvas. None of the plant forms have roots, suggesting that these botanicals were cuttings or trimmings. The color of these drawn botanicals is incredibly vivid and pronounced against the black backdrop. The work features almost every shade, tone, density, and vibrancy of the color red imaginable, from light flamingo pinks to burned crimson and deep reds like the fall leaves. They overlap and carry the eye across the canvas, undulating with varying degrees of contrast. Against the backdrop, it's unclear if these botanicals are falling or floating, but there is a sense of movement as if the composition is being carried by a current of wind or water. Does anyone from the audience have any questions or want clarification on the visual quality of this work? So Zachary, the colors featured in this drawing are exclusively red, from dark burnt siennas to flamingo colored pinks. What was it like exploring the spectrum and nuances of one color so specifically and so intimately?
Oh, I loved it. I mean, I love color, and I love sort of delving into a particular color. And red is, I mean, I always say I have like a favorite color, but I love all color. And I've done this with several different colors, several different compositions, which of course hold different sort of emotive qualities for me. In the case of this, I also did something that I do on occasion, where I purchased a big bouquet of flowers. And I did like hundreds of swatches of the different colors that I found in these flowers, in the bouquet of flowers. And I based a lot of the color scheme in this composition on that bouquet of red, different colored reds and hued reds in that bouquet. And there is of course the association to blood and to sort of the flow of blood. And really I kind of was depicting in this drawing sort of like a flow of blood cells that, you know, go through a vein. You've seen depictions of blood cells that sort of tumble through, a canal as a depiction of blood pumping through the body. And that's really what this is. And each of the flowers is sort of a single blood cell. So, and they go from sort of deep, dark reds all the way to, light into white. And I was thinking of, the words red blood cell and white blood cell. And so that's really what this depiction is. And I, in talking with Wayne about the inclusion of this in the exhibition, it just made perfect sense. Not only because it sort of looks a bit like a wallpaper, which is another association that I wanted to make, but it also relates to a lot of the work that Ross does, which is also about this, the minutia of the inside of the human body, which a lot of Ross's works overlap with, ideas of cells and so that's sort of the gist of this work. And of course the other part of the title I should talk about is its relationship to Mary Delaney, who is a 18th century botanical artist who I discovered in the British Museum several years ago, and she, was deeply impactful. Her work, her practice, and again, I'll sort of get into that in more detail. But really, in terms of the color here, it was just me wanting to explore red. And in another drawing called Water, after Mary Delaney, there's a very similar composition with all blues. So it's the exact same size, and it's the same idea, except it was sort of instead of a depiction of cells moving through a body, it was a depiction of a waterfall or a river, or these sort of particles of the water moving.
Hearing you talk just now reminded me of something that curator of visual arts Eileen had referenced in the wall label, which is that just like blood cells carry sort of oxygen for the body, plant forms are also responsible for oxygenating the planet.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I think it's just a really nice sort of metaphor and association to kind of tease out in this larger context. Are there any questions from the audience for Zachary about this work?
It's Sharon, is it framed?
It is. Yes, actually, I think that there's an image, the image just before this one shows it in the gallery, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, Eileen, can you go to that image? Thanks. So it's framed in a black frame, and then it's got a white, is it a white matte border around it, or is it recessed a little bit?
It's just floating. It's a float mount.
So the white border is just the wall?
It's just the background in the frame. So it's simply that the sheet of white paper, or sorry, the sheet of black paper is float mounted, and there's about an inch around the border of the drawing before the frame, and it's set into it. So it is covered with plexi.
Oh, it is. So that seems to be unusual. The other ones weren't, right?
No. Well, there is another one in the exhibition that's framed this way, but larger pastels tend to be. They have because paper expands and contracts. Float mounting really is the best way to frame a large drawing, just to promote that elasticity, allow the drawing to expand and shrink.
Can you explain what float mounting is?
Well, it's basically just placing the drawing into a frame, but without having to have a mat or a passepartout covering it, so that the edges and the paper itself just has enough that it can expand and shrink. Because what happens when you put a mat over top of it, it can start to bubble, and it harms the paper. But also, I draw often right to the edge. So I love the edge. The edge is a very physical thing for me. I often think of my drawings as sculptural. So when they're framed, I really like to still have a slight aspect of the drawing being, three-dimensional as well as two-dimensional.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. It's a great question.
I think we also have a question from curator of visual arts, Eileen. If you want to come on stage, Eileen.
Hi, Eileen.
Thanks, Jesse. Zachary, I was wondering if you can talk a little bit more about the surface of the paper. It looks velvety, but I think it's pretty smooth. And then if you could also talk about the orientation of the work.
Sure. So, yeah, the surface of the paper itself, this is an instance where I did not cover the whole surface with black pastel first. So this one is simply the black of the paper itself, and then the drawing with the different red pigment directly onto the black. So there was no black under drawing first with this composition. So you really get a sense in this one in a way that you don't in a lot of my other drawings of what the actual surface of the paper looks like when you're in front of the drawing. And the orientation changes all the time with a lot of my works, especially these ones that are sort of these compositions that can go, vertically or horizontally, and I really let the room decide. So this drawing, and shortly before the exhibition was mounted, this drawing was purchased by Scotiabank, which is a bank in Canada, and it was framed at that time. And they really, one of the things that appealed to them about it was how long it was. And I think they have a particular place where they're going to put it in the building that it's going into. But when I initially did the drawing, I did it sort of like waterfall. So the blue one and the red one were actually on these constructed stilts that were made out of metal, and they floated. They were vertical, and they went down, and they again touched the floor. And one was on one side, and one was on the other. So it was this sort of strange L shape that went in two directions. And so the blood was on one side, and the water was on the other side. And they were a lot more obviously sculptural in that instance, but both have since been framed. And one is in a consulate somewhere, and it's horizontal, and then this one will also be its final home will be likely horizontal. But if they want to at some point turn it vertical, I'd be happy either way. And I have to say too, just as a general note, I like to see my drawings in different contexts, in different ways, and situated. So I never say that it's one way or the other with a drawing like this. Obviously, the one behind you, the Wave Hill window, it has an up and a down. But in the case of this one, no.
Thank you.
Thanks, Eileen.
So we've got a little less than 15 minutes left for this program. And so I want to extend it out to the audience to ask Zachary or myself any questions about the work or the process.
Sharon, could I ask, I'm just, with the pastels, what is like the shelf life, if you will, like, I guess when you frame it, does that will that extend the life? I mean, aren't pastels, or maybe I'm wrong in my thought, but aren't pastels sort of fragile?
Yeah, they are. I mean, one of the reasons I'm attracted to pastel is that I originally have more training in painting, and I'm very interested in color. But I like the immediacy of drawing and its relationship to my body, but also I think better in the process of drawing and its immediacy. So I moved to pastel because the pigment and the quality of color is every bit as wonderful as oil and acrylic paint. And I find I also can work much larger, much faster through the process of drawing. But it actually has a very, very, I would say, good shelf life. There are certain things you need to consider with pastel, obviously. Many pastels, if you see in museums, like if you go to the Met and there's that room of pastels of mostly, I think, Impressionist and post-Impressionist artists, it's a dimmer room. And that's to protect the pastels, because there's a light fastness issue with pastel. But they do have a very long shelf life. And a lot of people also talk about, the fact that I don't fix my drawings. Well, fixatives are only about, maybe 50 to 100 years old. So I don't think they really know exactly what fixatives will do in the long run. And I find it's easier to repair a drawing if I have to. I've only had to on a number of occasions if they're not fixed. But also, fixing these drawings kills the surface. So it crystallizes that velvet quality to the drawing. And it also changes the pigment, the color changes. So I never fix them. But no, they're pretty hardy. You know, like one of my drawings, which has been shown a lot recently. I initially did it for a project in Milan several years ago in a museum that used to be a cathedral. So it has this huge vaulting ceiling. So the composition ended up being 33 feet, and it was 11-foot panels that were sewn together. And that drawing has gone from Milan to New York, back to Canada, and has been shown in several places in Canada. And it's, you know, it hasn't changed really at all. I mean, granted, that's only a couple of years, but the other part of pastel and paper and all of the materials I use, including ceramic, that really appeal to me is the ephemeral quality, is the fact that they do change over time. And that's just an added sort of metaphoric weight to the work. So ceramic actually, you know, if all human existence sort of disappeared for 40,000, 50,000 years, I heard this once, that the only thing of humans that would still exist is ceramic and teeth. So, you know, I like that, but also it shatters. It has this sort of fragile, intimate quality to it, in a similar way that paper does. And also, paper is made out of trees. It's plant material. It's, you know, and the pigment is, you know, is of the earth in a way. So I do think about those sorts of things when it comes to materials, but I would never shy away from working large and doing, you know, bolder sculptural things with the drawings because they might get damaged. I just take that risk.
And when do you decide which ones you put under glass and which ones you don't?
Basically, it comes down to, you know, I guess at a particular scale, something can be framed and is, you know, nicely presented framed. But, you know, for instance, the drawing that's behind me, which is part of a 45-foot installation, it would maybe be, or will maybe be framed if an institution or a person purchases it. But the cost of framing is prohibitive, number one. And so for me, I mean, I truly do these drawings to be placed in rooms without frames. So the framing comes later as a decision that a person who might purchase makes. Smaller works that are more intimate, they get framed, you know, and they have a different sort of visual purpose than the larger ones. The psychological impact is very different. So I am interested in massive, big compositions, but I'm also interested in miniature and minutia. But they have a different feel and a different presentation. So I treat them differently.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Great questions.
So we have a couple questions in the chat that I want to go through. So Nikki Enright asks Zachary, what would you like the viewer to feel in front of Blood Cell after Lady Mary Delaney, that red piece that we had just described?
Oh, I don't know. I guess I have my own ideas of when I'm in front of it, how I feel, but I don't want to prescribe anything. I mean, for me, I feel sort of calm and happy in front of it. I also don't really have, you know, negative associations to blood. I know blood as a material, and also in thinking about blood, can be sort of scary and frightening, and but my associations with it are sort of, you know, about the fact that, you know, that it's what sustains us. So it's, and that's why I also coupled it with water, because, you know, water and blood are, I mean, blood is what, 90% water, or a human body. I don't know exactly what the percentage is, but I mean, they're, you know, very important to human existence. So yeah, I feel pretty calm in front of it. But again, I don't know what I want others to feel necessarily.
No, I understand that. There's also something to be said about sort of keeping that relationship open, right, for the viewer to kind of come experience it for themselves.
I know that some people might see the flowers and have a very particular association with it before seeing the title, and then see the title, and that might change. And that's also, I mean, it's completely valid, but my association with it is calmness and serenity, I guess.
So we have another question. This is from Matt Frederick, which is, what type of pastels do you use?
Well, I use soft pastels, but in terms of the product, I use everything. So I use new pastel, which is perhaps by some not considered as as high quality, although I find it to be. I use Rembrandt. I use Schmenke, which is probably my very favorite. It's a German brand. I also use Holbein and Sennelier and Unison. So there are many different pastels that I'll use, and they all do slightly different things for me. Some are very, very soft and buttery, and they sort of tend to go on last, and they're sort of highlights. And but again, that's not all the time. But I'll have different sort of brands that I use for slightly different things, but I use everything.
We have a couple more minutes. If anybody else in the audience has any questions. Okay.
I actually wanted to say something. I noticed something in the chat. Nikki had said that that the fountain evokes a mushroom cloud. And now that she said that, I can't unsee it. I don't know how I didn't see it before, but that's really fascinating. And again, I mean, mushroom clouds are terrifying, but beautiful. There's this like weird association with they're sort of awful, horrendous things invented by humans. But when I saw it, makes me think of the drawings by Longo of mushroom clouds, and the aesthetic association with their beauty there's this like a double edge there. It's very interesting. So it's interesting to see that association myself now with the fountain. So thanks, Nikki.
Do you do other sculptures? I mean, do you do lots? Is sculpture something you do often as well?
It is actually, yeah. And sculpture has become, I just describe it as an extension of my drawing practice, because I work with sculpture in a very similar way in clay that I do to drawing. So everything is hand building. Everything is either through observation or sort of muscle memory. Creation through memory of plant life. And so in that way, it's very similar to my drawing. But yeah, I do a lot of drawing. A lot of sculpture. I'm working on a fairly large ceramic sculptural project for an upcoming show here in Canada. And there is one other ceramic sculpture in the exhibition as well. It's painted actually, so it has a slightly different sort of view or look to it than the unglazed, unpainted ceramic.
Well, thank you so much. Oh, sorry, was there another question?
No, I was just going to say thank you.
Thanks, Sharon.
Well, I want to give a big thanks to Zachary for participating and co-leading this program, and my thanks to Eileen Jing Lynch and Gabriel de Guzman for their support on this program and support in all other ways in the arts department. I want to let everyone know that we have 2 more programs coming up in the month of July in the arts department. Happening on Thursday and Friday of this week is a drawing workshop with Zachary Logan. And then on July 23rd, on Friday from 12:30 to 1:30, Eileen Jing Lynch is going to be leading a talk with Kamari Carter, who is an artist who has a new sculptural commission in one of our project spaces. I can send all of that in an email as a thank you and just sort of a follow-up after this program. Before we kind of close this out, I want to throw out one more opportunity for last questions or goodbyes, and we'll see you all soon if not.
Thank you. This is terrific. Jesse, if for some reason I didn't get this directly, but if I've signed up with Sharon, I should be on the list again, right?
Yeah, I will definitely make sure to include you on the next blast that goes out. And we're going to be doing another Beyond Site program in November, I think, for our upcoming exhibition called Eco Urgency, which is looking at sort of our current ecological moment.
That's terrific. This is wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
And Jesse, thank you for organizing this. It's a great program.